Welcome to Chautauqua People. I'm John V. My guest today is Kaye Lindauer. Kaye is a Pennsylvania native and spent her childhood there. Her father was a factory worker. At age 18, she decided that she needed to travel and enrolled in a language institute near Munich, Germany. She attended several schools to prepare for careers in the aviation industry and subsequently lived in New York City while working for National Airlines. Eventually, she made her way to Syracuse University, where she met John Lindauer and married him on graduation weekend. She stayed at Syracuse, earning a master's degree in psychology, and began teaching in the library school, eventually earning another master's degree. She and John pursued mutual interest in psychology, regularly doing January semester at the Jung National School of Advanced Analytical Psychology in Zurich, Switzerland. Recognizing the spiritual basis of Jungian psychology, she did further graduate work and began it at Colgate-Rochester Divinity School and completed a Master of Divinity at St. Bernard's. She's taught for 30 years in Syracuse University's Adult Education program and 30 years at Chautauqua Institution's Special Studies program, where students frequently repeat enrollment and her classes sell out. This year, she's offering classes during each of the 9 weeks of the season. She lives in Manlius, New York, when not at Chautauqua. Kaye, welcome to Chautauqua People.
Thank you.
How did you make your way to Chautauqua?
Well, I came as a child, and I remember walking up and down the streets of Chautauqua and being absolutely in awe of this place. It kind of totally sparked my fantasy. Never quite realized I'd be back to spend 30 years of my life here in the summers. So it's sort of like doors opened. I originally came because I was invited after receiving a grant from National Endowments for the Humanities. And 30 years ago, gave a talk on Alumni Hall porch. And I've been here ever since with Special Studies and with the Rhodes Scholar program that used to be Elder Hostel.
Now, did you do the customary childhood things at Chautauqua Club and sailing? And
No, we just came up for special events. We would come up sometimes for Sunday for the day. I would love, looking back, I think, wow, wouldn't that have been wonderful to be able to have been here as a child? So it means a lot to me that my grandchildren have grown up the summers here.
So you've given them that experience.
Yes.
Now, what really led you to begin teaching at Chautauqua? What was the initiative?
The initiative was to come here, first being invited, and then finding the people really right on my wavelength. My work was well received, and that always feels good. And I just found that at Chautauqua, I was able to do the work that I really wanted to do. Teach the type of classes I wanted and work with the type of people I was used to working with in the adult education program at Syracuse, as well as with all my graduate classes that I taught at Syracuse.
Now, how do you blend these various disciplines together?
Well, I teach for 9 weeks every summer, so different weeks I focus on different topics. And then so I have 3 great loves. One is literature, one is Jungian psychology, and one is theology. And so it's quite possible to take a literature class and look at the work through a Jungian lens. Just finished teaching a course in Emily Dickinson, and we looked at Emily Dickinson's poetry through the lens of Jungian psychology. So, and then she wrote a lot of poetry about God, and it all comes together.
Okay, can you go a little further and tell me a little more about how you would fit those two together? And what would be the major insights you would share with that class? Emily Dickinson, or some examples of what Jung wrote.
Well, I think that what you share is that we have a very complex psyche, and part of our psyche is conscious, but we have a huge part of our psyche that's unconscious. And that when, like for Dickinson, where do these great ideas come from? You know, it's like when you have an aha moment. You know, something has crossed over. You didn't know something a moment ago, and then you suddenly know it. Where did it come from? You see, and so you have this very wise unconscious, And when you have a really great idea, something has moved from the unconscious wisdom into consciousness. And you go, wow. And I think Emily Dickinson, I think her psyche had a thin place. And that her poetry was drawing from a deeper part within herself. You see? And according to Jungian psychology, which is a spiritual psychology, there's an acceptance of it in the unconscious of having a spiritual presence.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can read a sense of a spiritual presence in Dickinson's poetry. So, and right now I'm doing fairy tales, and a very similar thing happens. We look at fairy tales from a metaphoric point of view.
Mm-hmm.
The language of the unconscious is symbols and metaphors and images. So the fairy tale gives us these wonderful images to hold in our minds. And then we would say, okay, how can we relate that image to us metaphorically speaking?
Mm-hmm.
So we can bring Jungian psychology into the fairy tales, but also the fairy tales are about growth and development. And you never have growth and development without some understanding of the spiritual presence.
And does that have to be an organized religion?
Oh, no. Jung grew up Christian. No, but he studied the world religions, and he was convinced that there was such a thing as a spiritual presence. In other words, there's something within the psyche that is larger than the ego.
Mm-hmm.
And so that he named the spiritual presence.
Got it.
So it doesn't matter what religion that you practice, that part of the human psyche is part of you.
Is there?
It's there.
That's unquestioned about it.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask another question. When I look at your work for the year, in a pamphlet like this, and I have several of them in various years, very complex topics. How do you prepare these?
Well, I work on them all year.
Okay.
I begin with a great deal of reading.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And but every class that I teach, although every class is unique, nevertheless, one class builds on another. Right? So you kind of build a pool of basic information, and then you use different examples to carry through ideas. Particularly core Jungian ideas come up in every class.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, are your classes this year in the pandemic any different than they have been in the past?
No, they're no different. Don't have quite as large of an enrollment as I've had in the past, but I'm very happy with my classes. But something's unique in my classes this year. For the first time, I'm Zooming my classes as well as teaching them in person.
Mm-hmm.
So I teach them in person in the morning, and I Zoom in the afternoon. So I repeat the same class. I don't want to Zoom while I'm teaching, because I want to be totally present to the people who are taking the Zoom class. And so I have found that people who are not at Chautauqua this summer are tuning into my Zoom classes. So I'm not losing touch with them. I don't like to lose touch with my supporters.
Mm-hmm. No, they got to pay full tuition.
They do have to pay full tuition. But the Zoom classes are available through October 15th. So if they do register for the class, and they're a little busy over the summer, or they miss a class, they have a few months to catch up.
They can catch up. Uh-huh. And you do the classes in a formal classroom at Chautauqua?
Oh, yes. My classroom is 101 Hallquist.
Okay.
I have the best classroom at Chautauqua.
So that's the first floor?
That's the first floor.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Air conditioned.
Yeah.
It's good. I used to be in Logan, where the newspaper is now.
Right. You've been in Logan.
Uh-huh.
And where do you do the Zoom from? Zoom?
Oh, I do the Zoom classes from my home.
Okay.
But I do have a monitor that handles the welcoming students into the Zoom class. Mm. You know, I was thinking the other day about a quote from Socrates. You know, and Socrates was very upset about the development of the alphabet. And he thought, oh, if we have this alphabet and people are reading, they're not going to have any memory. Right? And then we had the printing press, and people thought, oh dear, if we're going to have printed books, we're not going to have any memory. Well, I don't want to live without the alphabet. And I don't want to live without printed books. But you know what? I no longer want to live without Zoom.
So that's now a part of it.
It's now a part of it, and I'm not going to give it up.
And you could do that from any place, couldn't you?
I could. Yes.
Are we going to hear about some Zoom classes offered for Manlius?
Well, you know, I do Zoom classes for the first time over the winter, but I'm very reluctant to tell my Chautauqua friends about my Syracuse Zoom classes, because when I'm at Chautauqua and the participants in my classes here at Chautauqua, well, I feel that Chautauqua, they should be true to Chautauqua. So I have a little problem with that right now.
Are they similar sorts of students in each?
Excuse me? Similar students?
Syracuse students similar to the Chautauqua?
Yes, very much so. They're retired professionals for the most part in the adult education classes. And they come, what's exciting about my Chautauqua participants as well as the Syracuse people is that they come from all walks of life. And I have about an equal number of men and women that come to the class.
Do many repeat?
Oh, that's my glory. Yes. I have people in my Chautauqua classes that have been coming more than 25 years.
Whoa.
And some of them never missing a summer. And I have some people in my classes that come to several classes throughout one summer. But I think that's what's really so special is that you develop long-term friendships. New people are always welcome. It's exciting to have a mixture of people who've been in my classes before and have developed kind of taste for Jungian psychology, and then new people. This class that I have currently, it's pretty much 50-50 people who've been before and people who are exploring it for the first time.
Now, I understand you initially learned some Jungian psychology by going to Switzerland.
Yes.
Has that continued?
Oh yes, I continue to go to Switzerland every year, but I had studied psychology. So my work in Jungian psychology was an extension of the work I had already been doing and continued to do right alongside with the Jung work. You know, the fact that it's a spiritual psychology, you know, basic psychology is equally important. I'm very interested in developmental psychology as well. And in fact, I've always taught courses on the different stages of human development. And now I have a new interest. Guess what? You know, no guess. Well, now that I'm getting older, I'm more interested in the developmental psychology as it applies to aging. And not this year, but a year or two ago, I've started to do courses in what I call poetic perspectives on aging. So
tell me more about those.
I try to take a poetic look at the experience while at the same time giving a background of what developmentally what the aging process is all about. Most importantly, to point out it's about generativity. In the aging process, to age successfully, psychologically successfully, one has to be concerned about the next generation. And we have a term for it based on the work of Erik Erikson, generativity. And so how to move into the different developmental stages that will give you the most meaning in one's life.
Do students of all ages seemingly get it for that concept of generativity?
You know, I don't know that you ever really get it until you're there, but at least the seed has been planted. Right?
And do you teach your developmental psychology with any other major authors included in your thinking?
Well, Erikson certainly is the foundational voice, but there's also Piaget. And of course, there's been many people right now, and I like to combine developmental psychology with the Jungian psychology, and then of course I always have to distinguish how Jungian psychology differs from Freudian psychology. So you have to know a little bit about Freud too.
Have you studied any Freudian material?
Oh, sure. Well, like I say, you have to. You have to know a bit about Freud so you can say how Jungian psychology differs. They used to be best friends.
Tell me more.
They used to be best friends, and for about 10 years. Freud was older than Jung, and so Freud was so taken with how intelligent Jung was. And Jung was a young psychiatrist at the Berholtzi in Zurich, which was the leading mental institution. We're talking around the first decade of 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
And so Freud identified Jung as the person he wanted to carry through his work. Well, it worked well for a few years until Jung had some ideas of his own. That did not go over well with Freud. And Freud's understanding of the unconscious was that of a personal unconscious. In other words, Freud believed that everything in the unconscious was repressed material, right? Where Jung said, well, that's all well and good. He didn't contradict Freud, but he carried the psychology further. Freud resented that. And he said, that's all well and true, but there's another layer of the unconscious called the archetypal unconscious. In other words, there's part of the unconscious that's repressed material, but there's also a part of the unconscious that's inherited predispositions. And Jung rejected that, and Freud rejected that. And so they split, and the friendship was never mended. And unfortunately, at the time, 1910, they created two different schools of thought, and everybody that was in the field of psychology at the day kind of took sides, and it's unfortunate. But they were both offered an honorary doctorate here in the United States at Clark University in Massachusetts. It was the first university in America to offer a course in psychology. And their first conference, they invited Freud and Jung to come, and William James was there as well, and gave them honorary doctorates. And they came across the ocean by boat, and Freud and Jung decided that during the voyage they would tell each other their dreams and analyze their dreams. Well, one day on the voyage, Freud shared a dream, and Jung asked him a question about it. We call that amplification.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me something more. And Freud said, no, I cannot tell you anything more, because if I answered your question, I would risk my authority. And at that moment, Jung knew that he could not carry through being a colleague of Freud, that he would have to go on his own.
Did they leave any evidence behind of their friendship?
Oh yes, we have their letters. In fact, 2 years ago I taught a course in the letters between Freud and Jung.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Jung always spoke well of Freud, held him in great honor, but there was no communication. In fact, there's a legend that Freud left Austria just a year before he died, 1938-39. And when Jung realized the danger that Freud's life was in, because he was Jewish in Austria at the time, the legend says that he sent money to Freud so that he could leave Austria. And Freud refused the money since it came from Jung. It's a sad story. Later, there was another woman who did pay for his way out. There was a deal made with the German government, and Freud's life was purchased from the Nazis. And Jung is, now since we're on the topic, I could say something else about that. It's about great interest in World War II. Jung has been criticized when it comes to World War II. Now, he was a Swiss, and he was in Switzerland. And the major criticism about Jung is that Jung understood the Nazi psyche. And he's accused of not sharing his deep understanding of what was going on with the rest of the world.
I never heard that. Mm-hmm. That's a significant point to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And, well, I will say that by the end of the war, Jung was on the Nazi hit list. So that had the Nazis invaded Switzerland, Jung would have been taken.
And he would have been
And there
destroyed.
is also what we can document this, that he did meet with a rabbi after World War II, and he apologized to the rabbi that he realized he didn't do enough.
And so during the war, he just lived in Switzerland and probably saw patients.
During the war, he saw patients. He also organized some very fine conferences called the Eranos conferences. And he invited the great speakers in Switzerland to gather together at this conference and talk about various issues of science and things without mentioning anything about the war. So while the war was going on, Jung has organized these wonderful conferences and says, let's get together. We need to nourish one another, but we're not going to bring up the war.
Wow, I never knew that.
And you can, and we have the notes on those Eranos conferences.
So that's well documented then.
Yes, well documented.
Have you read through those?
Oh, sure.
Now tell
They're
me
dynamic.
tell me a little more about, let's sort of tie this all together. When you go to Switzerland annually, just what do you do?
Well, I can attend classes. I attend lectures, and then I always go back to back so that I can attend lectures. And also, they do a yearly conference, and so I attend lectures and I also attend their conferences. The conferences are nice. The classes are always in Zurich. I go to ISAP, as you mentioned. It's the International School of Analytical Psychology. It's a break-off from the Jung Institute.
Mm-hmm.
The difference being at Jung Institute, you basically study the writings of Carl Jung. At this International School of Analytical Psychology, it's also Jungian-based, but there's more of an openness that this psychology has to continue to develop. And so people who are currently doing work in this area, their writings are studied as well as Jung's. So when I go, I take courses, and then what's wonderful about the conferences is that every year the conferences are held in a different location in Switzerland. So you get to go to...
So you go to Bern and Geneva.
Yeah, Zermatt, that's the favorite one. We go every so often to Zermatt.
And the course is given in German.
The course, no.
The lectures.
All from the very beginning, when the Jung Institute was established, back when Jung was still living, he made a rule that all courses would have to be in English.
Okay.
Because he recognized that that English was a broader language. And he wanted, the majority of the people who originally went to Jung for help, for psychological help, were Americans.
They were.
And Jung spoke fluent English, and he felt strongly about Jungian psychology has to be done in English.
Yeah. Now, have any of your students here gone to the...
I've had students come with me to Switzerland. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what's their feedback?
Well, I think perhaps they're not quite as excited about the material that I am. I think that they've heard me talk about it, and so they're curious and they want to come. But they tend to only come one time. And they're not, I guess it's not a priority for them, but they enjoy experiencing it once.
And these are offered in January?
I'm sorry. No, I used to go in January when I went to the Jung Institute. Now it's in May.
In May.
So I go and I'm there before I come to Chautauqua.
Okay. And how long does it last?
Well, you can take courses. It's not done by semester courses. It's done by a lecture schedule.
Okay.
So I can go for a couple of weeks and take lectures, and then the conference itself is about 10 days.
So if, let's say, we had a student who wanted to go for a week, the parents said we want you to do some other things besides this for a month, could a student go for a week?
They could probably attend the conference, but to take classes, you have to fill out an application, and you have to have at least 2 graduate degrees.
2 graduate degrees. So it's not something that a upper level undergraduate would be
No.
invited to attend?
No.
Okay. So that settles that. Let me ask little different questions here. I met your husband several years ago. We had a short but a very polite conversation. Did you do any classes with him?
No.
No. So you taught the classes here, but you did a lot together, and you did the time in Switzerland with him.
Yes.
But you never co-taught together?
We never co-taught.
Uh-huh.
No. Sometimes he liked to drum when I would tell a fairy tale, but we never co-taught.
Got it.
He would say, "You be the teacher," but he was
Yeah.
always there.
Now tell me what Joseph Campbell said about setting the direction of one's life.
The very famous statement, which is so often misinterpreted, and that is, "Follow your bliss." And people misinterpreted that to mean just do whatever you feel like. It's not what he meant at all. Follow your bliss is to come in contact with your archetypal makeup, your inherited predispositions, and work to identify what path should I be following? What's right for me? In other words, if you're looking for what's unconsciously right for you, you're not going by ego-centered decisions such as where am I going to make the most money, et cetera, et cetera. Those are ego questions. And follow your bliss is the opposite of following the ego-conscious, rational, logical, economic decisions.
Mm-hmm. That's
So,
significant.
and I think my life has been so wonderful because I think I have followed my bliss.
You had done what you wanted.
But Chautauqua has played a role in that. Chautauqua has provided an environment and the support that allowed me in the past years to follow my bliss.
That's great.
You need Chautauqua to do it.
You need to talk kind of background. Let me ask you one last question here. We're about out of time, but it's one I love to ask people. And if a young Chautauquan comes to you and expresses an interest in having a career like yours, blending various disciplines, what would be your advice?
Well, I think I'm really lucky to have the opportunity to do this. So I suppose my advice would go back to the Joseph Campbell statement, because I think just want them to have a passion for what they're doing. And then when you have a passion, when you're following your bliss, it's so extraordinary because doors open. And that's what Campbell believed. Campbell graduated in the first graduating class from the Jung Institute. Campbell was a Jungian.
Really?
Absolutely. So anything that Campbell said is putting into different words the teachings of Carl Jung. So that Carl Jung believed that if you were doing what was inherently right for you, that doors open.
And then you're successful.
The paths will for you to follow will be there for you.
Yeah, how do you know what's the right path for you?
Well, you have to be willing to do some personal reflection all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't identify this path once in your life.
No, it's not easy.
No, this is a lifetime process. To saying, okay, now am I following my bliss? You don't make this decision at 18 for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You make adjustments. We are out of time.
Thank you.
What else should we cover?
Well, I'm just very grateful. Thank you for talking with me.
This has been my pleasure.
Thank you.
And I hope some students will see you and take your classes.
Well, they're welcome.
And I know a couple of psychology faculty who might want to join you in Europe in May.
Well, okay. Sounds good.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.